Quora is amazing, gigantic ontology of everything, and I kind of, from many folks I heard it's one of the best living ontologies, so really curious to hear how it came about, how it works.
Thank you very much for having me. This is actually my first presentation outside of physics, believe it or not. So hopefully I got the level right. I was asked to give a talk about the topic ontology, and what I want to convey to you is that we're still in the process of really scoping it out. I've been part of Quora now for about 9 months, and it was a user-generated ontology before. It was in reasonable shape, and now we're trying to really systematize it and go forward and make it into a world-class ontology. I can't really talk a lot about the products that are used ontology, but I'll talk about the structure and some of the philosophy behind it and the constraints that we have. So I mentioned a lot of you know what Quora is. It's about sharing and growing the world's knowledge through question and answer. So you have someone who has a question and they ask it on Quora. They write a question and then we distribute it to an answer. One answerer finally, one possible answerer finally writes an answer, and then we distribute that to readers. And the reader reads the question and has follow-up questions, and the cycle goes on and on and on. And it really works wonderful. And it's basically premised on the idea that if you know the answer to the question, it's really easy to write an authoritative answer. If you don't know the answer, it's actually much harder. So, for instance, if you watched the Academy Awards the other a couple weeks ago, and you saw J.K. Simmons, he didn't talk at all about the entire production crew of Whiplash. Didn't even thank the directors or anyone else. He just spoke about his family. And if you were like me, you thought, that's a little bit weird. And you wondered, how did people involved with the production of Whiplash think about J.K. Simmons not thanking them? That seems a little weird. A couple days later, one of the producers of Whiplash, Cooper Samuelson, I think he's that guy there, happened to be on Quora and came across this question and wrote basically a narration of what happened. J.K. told us that he would be using the Oscar speech to make a personal statement. He had plenty of opportunities to thank us beforehand, and everyone who worked on the film thought his speech was great, was lovely, especially my mother. I don't know if his mother actually worked on the film or not. I don't think so, but he's since written actually about over a dozen answers on the production of Whiplash, and there's a lot of inside information there now. So it's great. If you look at that question and say, who the heck would be able to answer that? You could speculate, boy, that's really out of form for the Oscars. Maybe they told beforehand, but how do they feel? Well, you know now. So that's basically the organic nature of Quora. And topics, which form the basis of the topic ontology, the entities of the topic ontology, are applied to questions and only questions. We don't tag answers separately from questions. And it's really actually important that we get the topics applied to the questions at the time that they are written. So you have the asker, and they write the question, and we must get the topics on at that point in time before we distribute this question to potential answerers. And this is actually a really challenging problem that we're constantly developing on. And that's because we only have 1 to 2 sentences to identify what the subject of the question is and how we should identify it and identify who the best potential answerers are. And I tell you, it's quite challenging even as a human to identify a lot of these, what the subject of a lot of these questions are. And so what we do is that in addition to any sort of back-end systems that we use to identify questions, identify topics algorithmically, we also have the ability to have users correct our suggestions, and this helps us improve the system going forward. And additionally, after the question goes live and gets asked and is out there in the wild, other people can come in, modify the question, and they can also modify the topics, and so the topics get involved, and this actually helps redistribute the question to better and better potential answers. So topics play a critical role in that, getting to the person who actually knows the answer, who potentially can know the answer authoritatively. Now, on the other hand, after answers are written, topics play a critical role in distributing these answers to potential readers. Writing an answer is great, but you really want to have it read by tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And to do that, you have to know who are potentially interested in this, and this is where topics also come in. And so after the answer comes in, we distribute these answers out to readers. And so what you see is that the topics provide really a linchpin in the cycle of asking, answering, and learning on Quora. So they really are an essential part of the whole system. So I'm going to first spend a few minutes talking about what our conventions are for topics. And you should feel free to stop me at any point in time. So I'm going to do just a basic classification of topics. And this is, a lot of this comes about due to just the historical usage of topics. And what was one of the hardest things to actually realize is that there were actually two different classes of topics on Quora that had been created and used historically. There were what I would call standard topics. And how these topics were being used were to identify the subjects of the question. Sort of intuitively how I would have used them. So for instance, what is the best type of Chinese restaurant? The subject of that question is Chinese restaurants. And we should note that it's not, we don't want people tagging, applying topics to as potential answers. So Sichuan restaurants or Hunan restaurants or Chinatown are not appropriate topics to be applying to this question. Even though those are related concepts, they are not actually the subject of the question. So this is how we want the topics to be used. And of course, there can be multiple topics. So why didn't J.K. Simmons thank anyone involved with Whiplash? So that's J.K. Simmons is obviously one of the subjects of the question. The 2015 Academy Awards is implicitly in there because that was when this occurred. And Whiplash 2014 movie was obviously also a critical subject of this question. So people who know and have experience with these topics may be able to answer this question or provide interesting context for it. So these are just sort of standard topics.
Jay?
Yes?
So you may be about to answer this, and if you are, just let me know. But you mentioned that you don't want potential answers to be tags to be tagged as topics for questions. Is there any kind of enforcement or testing that you were able to do to help that along?
Yes.
Let's repeat the question.
So the answer is are there any ways that we actually enforce this condition that we don't want potential answers as topics applied to questions? And there are systems, both the community and other systems based on both algorithmic and various other varieties that I can't speak too much about. Yep.
Okay, related here. Can you classify into multiple topics here? Do you deal with the probabilities or totally binary?
Right now, we treat each topic as being equal. So the question is do we treat each one of these topics equally? We have some information about which topics we think are more relevant for the question, but we don't actually use that at this point. I think we've experimented with it, but right now, basically a topic is a topic is a topic on a question.
Can you touch on how you go about tracking these topics in a sense?
I can't speak on any of that, I'm sorry.
And then the other question is best supporting after another topic just as a
we could have had a best supporting actor topic. I don't think it actually exists on Quora. It's something that is part of the topic ontology that's missing. Best supporting actor 2015 Academy Awards is a very appropriate topic that could have been applied. I don't believe it exists.
Follow up on that, you have latent topics that you don't really know what is yet, but they're kind of still classified or grouped.
I'm sorry, are there latent topics?
Yeah, latent topics, kind of like a topic. You can't get the label on it, But still, you see that 5 different questions seems to be about that particular.
We do have some indications that we don't actually use that information at this point.
Are there any user-defined topics like tags?
All these topics are almost all the topics are user-defined.
But like, is there like a thing like hashtags or something where they actually put in tags?
No. So the topics are essentially the hashtags of Quora. So you mention them, and they are treated as entities, and they're linked, and all the information is around them are collated. Great. So these are standard topics. The other class, which has many different examples, are what we've come to call question tag topics. And this identifies the type of question it is. And this is actually realizing that there are these 2 distinct categories has really led to a lot of improvement in how we think about topics at Quora. So how do I get rid of bed bugs? It's possible to apply it. It's a how-to question. And people have created topics of this variety, identifying the type of question it is. And also applied bed rugs as a possible topic. But this is obviously a completely different type of entity than bed bugs, right? It's it's describing the class of question that it is that the question belongs to. As another example, why is air travel so expensive? Well, that could be a question that contains assumption. Is it really that expensive? And that's identifying the type of question it is, some property of the question, but not the subject of the question. And so these are actually very different entities. And the reason why we separate these 2 types out between standard topics and these question tag topics is that the subjects of the question is where people have expertise and interest. How-to questions, you don't really develop expertise in answering how-to questions or questions that contain assumptions. If you answer 50 questions that contain assumptions, whether you know the answer to the 51st question is essentially unrelated. I answered 50 questions about air travel, all that contained assumptions. The next one is about tigers. I know nothing about tigers. And so it's really, the type of question is, identifying the type of question is really quite distinct from the subjects of the question. Yep.
So who decides which of the 2 groups a topic with or a label would be in?
Jeff, let's repeat the question.
Who decides what topic? So the community decides. I have final say. These are actually pretty well identified and separated out in different types of parts of the Quora taxonomy of topics. Beforehand, I collected them and identified them as different ontological sets. They were kind of intermingled in, but sort of grouped off in some ways, and people realized there was something different about them. And so identifying them in a systematic way and moving them off is something that has happened. And I decided it, but they were more or less understood by the community to be different. And a lot of times, how people are using topics is implicitly as a question tag, so as a question tag rather than as a subject of the question. And so that's one of the challenges that we have to communicate to in our systems. Identifying the systems is when historical topic application has actually not been about the subject of the question, but it's been about the type of question that it is involved with. So we have a big corpus of knowledge, and that we have to be identifying these multiple different ways of using the same topic to make sure that we're going forward in the right way. And these types of topics have actually been pretty heavily used, but we're scaling them back because they really don't serve our system, serve the purpose of topics very well. So this is one of the sort of highest level, most coarse graining of the type system of topics at Quora. Another thing to appreciate about Quora is that topics go down to a very fine detail, finer detail than most Wikipedia articles. It's more like the subsections and sub-subsections of Wikipedia articles. It's sort of like the level of topics that we want. So restaurants in San Francisco is a is a perfectly fine topic. But there are restaurants in North Beach, and then you can even get Italian restaurants in North Beach as a potential topic that can have real meaningful content. If you get a restaurant owner who's owned a restaurant in North Beach for 30 years and writes extensively about the history of Italian restaurants in North Beach, what all the issues of owning restaurants in North Beach, the interaction with Chinatown, it can be really interesting content there. And we don't want to have it conflated with say the very high level topic, restaurants in San Francisco. There's really this separate, very small niche of information. So we really want to get topics down to very small, fine levels of detail. We have a lot of topics, and the basic point of view of the company is that we barely started to create them at this point. So we're going to be creating many more topics going into the future, down to very fine levels of detail, because people really have experience and knowledge at very fine levels of detail, and a lot of the best questions are about very small areas, and people like to read about that, so it's useful for us.
So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about whether you have metrics for how detailed a topic is. And there can be some confusion sometimes between how deep an ontology a topic is, and whether depth in an ontology only helps you if you know that the coverage of the ontology is uniform, and so there's some tension in understanding the difference.
So we do have some metrics for that. The topics have been around for a while. The size of the topic is actually, the amount that has been used and followed is often a good indicator, but there are a lot of new topics, and so understanding where it falls in the taxonomy and how it relates to its topics and how those parent topics are, how big those parent topics are some ways that we actually infer these, the actual, how large of an area of knowledge a given topic is. And so we have ways of inferring that.
So when I look at the restaurants and restaurants in North Beach, exactly what about there. Clearly, there's one hierarchy around the location of restaurants and another concern, which is the kind of restaurant. How do you manage these two different?
I'll actually speak about this at the end as the one of the forward-looking things that we're building out. A few forward-looking things we actually speak about. So. And I won't be able to involve in this, obviously, but some basic notions of it. Okay, so there are rules about what are appropriate topics. Topics at the end, sorry. So topics should be nouns, and generally plural nouns. So houses, not house. Topic should be atomic, which means that we don't take unions of distinct ideas. So New York and Miami and Puerto Rico, individually fine topics, but we don't want to have a topic that is all three of them, or in this case, two of them. So we should be reticent of that. A lot of these have actually been created historically, so we have to divide them up. Topics should also refer to single ideas, and so that you can actually speak about them in a faithful manner, so that people actually know what that we're speaking about. And this is also very important for when we start classifying topics, because if you're speaking about many different notions of something with the same name, how can you possibly get it into a taxonomy in the right place? So, like the Captain America creative franchise, that is something that overarches, everything involving Captain America, from the comic books to the movies to the little toy figures to the character itself to the every other entity associated with that creative franchise. The movie is obviously something quite different. The character is different, and so we need to disambiguate these different ideas if we want to get these things put in the right place in the taxonomy, and also to know what sort of properties these topics actually have. Because the creative franchise is quite different than the Captain America toy soldier. Okay, so with that as just sort of the basic background of what the topic system is, I'll go forward and talk about the actual ontology of the topics. And I should say that the ontology, I mean two different things, two separate things. I mean both the taxonomy of the topics and also the type system and the information we keep around each topic. So there are parent-child relationships, and this is the one type of topic-to-topic relationship that we have. We only have one at Quora at this point, and it's a directed relationship from a topic that is bigger and totally encompasses a smaller topic. And so you have physics, and you have quantum physics that is under it, perhaps not even as a direct child, but as a even further down the graph. But schematically, the quantum physics is clearly a subset of physics. And so the questions on quantum physics are a subset of the questions on physics. And so with these parent-child relationships, we can form a taxonomy of topics. So our topic graph is rooted in something that we call major topics. It just doesn't have any content in it, it's just there to be the root of the graph. And then we branch out to 18 levels at the first level into sort of the big major areas of human thought. Science, engineering, technology, food, cuisine, and cooking. This is partially driven by how the topics under them are related, and also some editorial judgment about how we plan on how we actually think people conceive of these topics.
You publish your own?
It's visible in product. The ontology is visible and editable in product by any user. So it's community driven, but we don't publish it. So if you want to go and inspect it, you can. There's no API for it, and we strongly discourage scraping. At level 1, there are 18 topics. At level 2, we're getting down to sort of more of a more reasonable topics, and we have 110 elements, different topics at this level, and then it roughly grows geometrically for 6 to 7 levels under it, sort of spreading out at a reasonable pace at every point at each level. And we've made sure that through level 3 things more or less look sensible, and that they refer to similar levels of specificity. But this is just the beginning. We're probably planning on having it be, 12 levels deep in all honesty, once you actually build out the full core ontology. Yes?
Where would your Italian restaurant in San Francisco fall in this product graph? Would that be an Italian restaurant or something in San Francisco?
Why don't I come back to where the Italian restaurant in San Francisco would fall? I'll get to it shortly. So, most importantly, it's a graph, not a tree. So the taxonomy, you can have multiple parents, not just a single parent. So this is actually very important because there are many concepts that are synthetic. They're the intersection of two topics. So physics and biology, not a perfect example, but biophysics is the intersection of the two. And so this allows us to actually address some of the natures about when you have a concept that inherits from multiple parents, where it comes from. And the question is, what are the rules around that? So it's obviously acyclic. You shouldn't be your own parent or own descendant. But we also have rules that you shouldn't be your own aunt or uncle. And so this is, I don't know if I've ever seen this before, but it's like you have a parent topic in blue here, and you have a topic Mr. Yellow here and Ms. Green. Green should not contain yellow under it, or blue shouldn't. So that's a mistake in the scoping of the topic. Either the intersection of the yellow with the green is meaningful, or if it isn't meaningful, then it shouldn't be under there. If it is meaningful, it should have a separate name, because you mean something different than the thing outside of the just the intersection with the blue and not the green. Similarly, It goes down the tree, so further descendants should be distinct from each other. You can be your own cousin or other types of relationship. There's no scoping problem. So in the example of biophysics, you have biology and physics that descend from science, and their intersection is biophysics. Yes?
So it seems to follow that a given topic must be given at a single level.
No, we refer to the level of a topic as the shortest path to the root topic. And in particular, like restaurants are both a concept around cuisine and cooking and food, but it's also a business, and it isn't. And businesses are a level 2 topic as well. And so when you get down to restaurants, it's deeper in the business side of the tree. So
I see. Okay, so there's an exception made.
So you don't need to be the same. You just can't be a direct descendant of this sort. So you can be on different levels. So you can be your own first cousin once you move, but you can't be your own uncle or great uncle, great great aunt, so on and so forth.
So if you're under different roots, if you're under different roots, then you can
Under
be at
different
different levels.
branches,
You
yeah.
can't be at different levels of the same root.
Exactly. So this is one of the rules. Other ways we identify problems is if all the descendants of one topic are coming in from one topic. So you can that's often a sign that there's some misplaced parent-child relationship. So there are lots of tools that we can use to make sure that the scoping of topics are appropriate. One of the biggest problems that we had from the organic ontology was actually academic topics, which I actually was a little bit surprised by, because we had academics spend a lot of time and love on this part of the ontology. And there was a real problem with just the conception of how it was organized. And this is, I think, goes back to the academic hubris. So there's chemistry, and the way that it was organized was that chemical substances were a child of chemistry. And then all things chemical fell under chemical substances. So CO2, and then under CO2 there was atmospheric carbon emissions, and then there was climate change somewhere under there. What was even worse is that there was cultural studies, and then there was American culture under that, and then Americans under that. So Angelina Jolie. Yeah. So, and this is like, and you can obviously see in retrospect what the solution is. You have chemistry, which inherits from it's a physical science, and it studies chemical substances. So it's more of the intersection of physical substances, chemical substances, and physical sciences. And then all things chemicals descend from here. Chemistry does not pick up CO2 and all the children of CO2 and all the possible uses of carbon dioxide. So that's, otherwise you'd have biology as a descendant of chemistry, and really sort of absurd relationships. In physics, it was the whole physical universe was under physics, including every person alive, which is obviously very meaningful. So by descoping the academic topics so that chemistry is the study of chemical substances and is a physical science, you can actually clarify this and make sure that the descendants of chemistry and all these academic topics actually make sense. Because you really want that so that you can really go down multiple steps and make sure that you're still in the same rough area of knowledge. And this was one of the biggest problems. And I should say one of the most confusing ones was history, because we don't really distinguish history from the historical events around the topic. We use the term actually very interchangeably. So the history of France, does that belong under history, or and then all the historical events of France, which can come down to the present. So like Nicolas Sarkozy could be under the history of France, which is under history, and that really is an overscoping of what history actually studies. So you have to separate out the historical events of a country or an area or some area of knowledge from the study of those events. So that huge mess. Okay, the type system. There's another slice of these standard topics that is very important. One is whether it's an abstract concept, restaurants, universities, physics, companies, or whether it's an example of the topic, specific realization, it's sometimes called. So Momofuku Noodle Bar is a restaurant, obviously. Noma, Linea. This is very important because abstract concepts, if you identify them, should not have locations, for instance, and you shouldn't be able to say review an abstract concept or do lots of things that abstract concepts that it's perfectly acceptable to do to examples of concepts. It's perfectly appropriate to review Noma. Okay, it's a really awesome restaurant. This part of the type system hasn't been developed, and it's being rolled out as we speak, slowly but steadily. And so actually this, if you go into a lot of topics, some abstract concepts had locations associated with them due to some mistake a while back. And if we had had this type system in place, we could have prevented that. Okay, the most important type of relationship that is sort of special, that goes beyond just sort of a parent-child relationship, is a relationship. And we really want to separate this from a standard parent-child relationship in Quora for several reasons that I'll discuss. Gary Danko is a restaurant in San Francisco. Restaurants in San Francisco is an abstract concept. Just this notion of what a restaurant entails. Gary Danko, you can go there, see the blacked out windows, and think, well, I really want to eat there. And so this type of relationship, we did not create a separate type of parent-child relationship. Instead, what we did is that we created a structural topic so that restaurants in San Francisco has a keyword in front of it, specific restaurants in San Francisco, which Gary Danko is a specific restaurant in San Francisco. At some point in the future, we might migrate this so that this composite structure is just a different type of relationship, but we're still rolling out this portion of the type system.
Good question.
Yep.
So, for instance, if you have emotions under which you can have happiness, you can have things which cannot have specific things, right? So yes. Does the restaurant know that it can have specific instances?
I think that what we'll talk about is just after this slide. So another reason to do this is that this is a relationship instead of being one to a few. It's really one to many. Like there can be an arbitrarily large number of child topics arising from is a relationship. There's no limit in principle. And so if you want to actually think about the topic ontology as being navigable, it really makes sense to sort of separate off these type of relationships, which are very different than, say, the restaurant scene in San Francisco, which is a distinct concept that it should be a child of San Francisco, restaurants in San Francisco. And obviously, these are not parallel concepts in terms of their level of specificity. One is about specific restaurants, one is about the restaurant scene, and it's another abstract concept. So having this intermediate step where we can, intermediate topic where we can separate off these relationships is very useful. And it also makes it clear that these are parallel relationships. And again, at some point in the future, we might just modify it so that there's a separate, a new type of relationship. But is a relationship is not the only type of relationship that you need to consider. Is a kind of relationship is another type, which is abstract concept to abstract concept, which I think is what you were referring to. There's restaurants in San Francisco, and there are Chinese restaurants in San Francisco. Chinese restaurants are still still an abstract concept. It's not a restaurant, but it's a specific type of restaurant in San Francisco. So we use the key phrase, specific types of, to denote we have is a kind of relationship. And so this is where how we denote these different types of relationships that are sort of one to many. We don't encode as parent-child relationships many to many relationships. So we don't want relationships like this in the topic ontology, where they're just kind of back and forth And so like actors in films. Actors participate in many films. Films have many actors. The actor was part of the creation process of the film, but should they be the parent of it or should they be the child of it? It's really not clear, it depends on your point of view sometimes. And so you could really end up with problems with scoping, and also it's basically impossible for an actor or the film to be completely encompassed in either one of them. So like Chris Hemsworth should, being under Thor, the movie doesn't make any sense from a scoping point of view. There are a lot of other things that Chris Hemsworth has done. And questions about the movie Thor, the production value, the lighting of it, the CGI, really shouldn't flow up through Chris Hemsworth. And so these types of relationships we need to just X out from parent-child relationships. These are related concepts, and they should be stored in some other part of the knowledge base. Similarly, startups and VCs. Startups typically have many venture capitals who fund them, and VCs fund many startups. And someone had actually really systematically gone through and encoded this relationship as parent-child relationships throughout the startup world, which meant that basically every startup went through finance as their parent, which really led to some bizarre sort of scoping issues.
Quick question on that. So
Yeah.
Do you think of these abstract sort of entities as classes, and then is a sort of instantiation of that class in a sense, or?
I think that, this is all category theory at the end of the day, and I think object-oriented programming is an example of category theory. So I think these are relationships. These are the mappings between in a category. So yes, I think that is an example of this type of relationship that is very general throughout mathematics. And in fact, as a physicist, I always disdained category theory. I thought it was not all that interesting. But in fact, I think the next thing I talk about is the first time I've actually found a little bit of use for it, which is location, which is the question, how do we encode location in all these fine-grained topics? So this is in progress. There are a lot of details about exactly how we do this in practice in terms of just making Quora still feel organic, but the structure of it is very clear. So restaurants in San Francisco is clearly a composite topic created from both restaurants and San Francisco. And this is part of a general class of topics where you have some locatable concept: restaurants, universities, hotels, parks, and locations. So San Francisco, New South Wales, Aix-en-Provence. They're all separate. You can take the product of these two structures and just create all. These are all valid concepts. And then the question is, how do we organize these? And the answer is that there was a natural notion of parentage arriving from this product of different trees. So you can think about restaurants as being part of a tree of businesses and tree of locatable concepts, in fact, a graph of them. And you can think of Palo Alto as part of our classification of locations. And so when you ask, what is the parent of restaurants in San Francisco? Well, it's essentially a derivation. You take the parent of restaurants times Palo Alto and plus the restaurants times the parents of Palo Alto. Okay? And both of them are parents, or any of them. So let's say that restaurants, the parents of restaurants, is a specific type of business, service business. Palo Alto is a specific city in San Mateo County, and it's also a specific city in San Francisco Bay Area. However we choose to organize locations that this applies to, and it can have multiple parents. And so when we perform this product of these two different trees and add them up, you find that the parents of restaurants in Palo Alto are specific types of businesses in Palo Alto, specific service businesses in Palo Alto, restaurants in specific cities of San Mateo County, and restaurants in specific cities of the San Francisco Bay Area. Yeah.
So if I'm following an implication of the first part of your slide there where you sort of
This
inclusion, if you will,
yeah.
For restaurants Palo Alto on one side and then some.
The parents, trying to find the parents of restaurants in San Francisco on one side, and the parent, and then how it was constructed on the other side.
Sure.
Should be constructed on the other side.
So it seems like in order to be able to do that, there has to be some notion that restaurants in Palo Alto is a compound
Yes.
topic, and it has some components. Do you have a model for the potential components or different ways
So there
to
are
define compound topics?
there are types of topics that are locatable topics, and there are types of topics that are locations. And in principle, all products are feasible topics to create, product topics to create. Okay. How we actually build out all those topics is the main question. You don't want to build out, Peruvian restaurants in South Central. Some place that doesn't have Peruvian restaurants. So that's the main trick, is how you actually scope appropriately and truncate these topics at an appropriate point of view. And it's pretty easy to come up with good heuristics on how you do that. And I can't go into the real details of it, but if you follow your nose in terms of like the feel that you want it to have, it comes out pretty in a pretty straightforward manner. I'm just finishing up right now. So we have the rest of the type system is here: academic fields, professional fields, professional careers, companies, products and services, locatable topics, has a location, events, recurring events, and then we also have some ones that still need to be rolled out. So for some reason we didn't have a way of labeling something as a location. It's already, you could just create that and implement it. Living person, a person, and activities are all things we're planning on doing. These are all different ontological entities. You can imagine many different products associated with each one of these classes of these different types.
What is the difference between locatable and has a location?
Locatable does not have a location. So what is the difference between locatable and has a location? So locatable is a class of concepts whose specific realizations, whose examples, ISOs, have locations. Okay, so restaurants doesn't have a location. Gary Danko has a location. So the ISA versions of these locatable topics should have locations. Okay, and ISA location is that is the primary element about them. So Death Valley should be separated from Death Valley National Park. So the location of Death Valley National Park is Death Valley.
What's the difference between national parks and Death Valley National Park?
So Death Valley National Park is a national park, and its location is Death Valley. That's actually not encoded in the. It's only encoded via this product structure that I discussed here. It's through this chain that we actually encode. Yeah, and so eventually it gets up to Death Valley, but the parent of this is nil, or it goes up to the major topics. That's when it becomes Death Valley. Okay. Any further questions about the type system? I can't really speak on all the different ways we can and are using it. Okay, so the outlook is that the topic system is a critical part of Quora for getting the whole question and answer process to work efficiently and well. This topic ontology is still being built out. We have a large base of topics, but we're only at the beginning. Part of the challenge is that we need to standardize this organic structure. That the community aspect of Quora is very important to us. And so we can't just wipe the slate clean and start over. We want to keep the community aspect of it, so that the way that people have used concepts in the past is still faithful. yet it's standardized across the entire topic base. And that's necessary to make it predictable, reliable, and ultimately, really usable in an algorithmic sense. We're still developing the type system, and what this really will allow us to do is be a lot smarter in how we use topics. And there are lots of cool things coming using all these different entire type system. Okay, thank you very much.
I have a follow-up question here. So now you have all that excitement for this, very inspiring, and totally shines through your presentation there that you really like this. So a question to you here, just to follow up. What takes the physicist to get so excited about ontologies and this whole topic?
So why am I excited about this? I think it's cool. I love Quora, so first of all, I was a long-time user. I've always loved the mathematical structures and knowledge, and I know a lot about lots of different topics, and so it's a very natural thing. And so actually understanding what the actual structure is really cool. And figuring out how we actually use all this structure is really what gets me excited, so that we can actually be smart about what we do. There's so many obvious things that be done once we have this implemented across the board, and so that's what gets me excited.
Just wondering how, in practice, how do you use this and how is this integrated? Would you store this in a relational database, or would you store this in other kind of data store?
So how do we store this? I believe it's a relational database. It's wonderful because I don't need to deal with any of the infrastructure on the back end. Being a physicist, they've been very good to me in that way, not to have to worry about too much of the details. Everything works beautifully from the topic system and in terms of the performance and the issues at this point. And I've been told that none of the issues here are going to provide any performance issues.
Is it like is the ontology generated daily, or is it real time?
So the ontology can be changed in product by anyone. Obviously, we lock down certain things that are possible vandalism, but anyway, so it's visible in line, and when you make a change in ontology, it happens live. So if you change the name of a topic, if you change the type system of the topic, almost everything is updated on the fly.
So how do you evaluate or validate those changes when you make them?
How do we evaluate the changes? So one of the biggest problems is making sure that everything is scoped properly, so that when you want to have questions flow up to parents, so that you can actually find, you ask a very specific question, you want to start looking up the tree to find people who, you may not have anyone at that level of expertise, but you can flow up the graph, and making sure that actually makes sense and has the right feel and that the engagement is good. And it's really easy to have things that are off in it that just, all the metrics just go to hell. So.
What interface, UI interface or tool do you use to view this or manage this from your end?
Vim.
Oh, Vim. Okay.
Yes. I've looked at various ways of representing and making pretty pictures.
Yeah.
It's way too large for any of that. Okay.
Way too large. By the way, can you give some counts on?
You can look publicly. I don't like to say that number, but it's large,
okay.
And it's. You really need to deal with either skims of topics or certain parts of the graph. At which point, I found it's just as easy to come up with standardized analysis.
One more. You mentioned about many-to-many, right? And you just said put them somewhere.
Yes.
Can you discuss a little bit?
We have not settled on that yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Work in progress.
Yeah, that's work in progress. And we haven't even decided what the potential benefits of this, of such things, of having it manually curating such a knowledge base. I'm sure there are some, but how we would actually want to use it, which would dictate the scoping of it.
So this reminds me of some of the ontologies out there for CYC?
Uh-huh.
Have you guys, so you guys looked at it?
Yes, I'm the only one that's, I've looked at it, I've been influenced by many systems out there and many academic books on this, both on the mathematical side. As far as I've been able to tell, the Quora topic ontology is not a copy of the systems that were developed by the community are not a mirror image of any system that is out there, as far as I can tell. So we're trying to make things that are standardized and make sense, and it's been heavily influenced by a lot of the different systems out there. But as far as I know, we're not a copy of any exact system. But I'm always, oftentimes good ideas are, are attractors. So we may have isomorphic.
One more. Thank you. How do you identify users as experts?
I can't say about that, but people write lots of questions on certain topics.
Okay.
They also provide biographies on their topics.
Okay.
And so we
looking for a shortcut.
Write good questions that get lots of upvotes on a certain topic, and you will become an expert. We will identify you.
Any other questions?
What makes it, so you just sort of mentioned it before, so the good ontology is something that makes sense to you, but like, do you measure user experience in some way?
We do. So whenever we so creating the products around this, we have to make sure that that when we start adding in these features and using these features in product, that it makes sense. And it's at scale. This is not like it's not like we're having people interact directly with this. This is sort of at the heart of the system. So when we start putting it in, it's actually very difficult to debug. So we just watch what happens to various levels when we start using these additional features, and then figure out what's wrong, diagnosing what happens when it's wrong, and figure out why things went right. That is very challenging. But usually, what it boils down to is that why the heck is this topic under here? That makes no sense. And a lot of times that actually, it's actually very difficult because you look at it and you say, oh, that makes sense. Then you actually have to realize all the ways that the topic could be ambiguous and all different ways it's being used. And so it's actually very difficult to really just fix that problem. Is to disambiguate the topic. So you can identify when there's ambiguities, but actually figuring out how to resolve that and what the proper resolution is requires some brain work. Yes.
How often do you wake up in the morning and realize that something has been totally miscategorized?
Every day. Yes, we're constantly improving things, and yes, the taxonomy is not finished. How often do I wake up and realize there's a whole new type system or type or relationship type? That's happening much less frequently now. So.